Welcome to the Sensible Socialist Podcast, a podcast for the rational left.
We need to unite and work together if we're all going to get through this. Sounds like socialism to me.
The amount of people I see talking about socialism positively is actually staggering.
Do you think, do you really think that a proletarian revolution is just around the corner in America?
Grab your pitchforks and stab your mayor.
Your hero, Obama.
He's not my hero. I'm not fucking idiot.
If
Bernie Sanders were president, right, and he wanted to bring the same ideas as for socialism into this country, do you think that we would benefit?
Yeah.
But I just told you Venezuela's eating rats.
But I just want people to have health care. I don't want,
Same thing Hugo Chavez.
Oh my god. You people have, worms in your brain, honestly.
All right, welcome to this episode of the Sensible Socialist Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Gustafson. And I want to start out this episode with a quick personal announcement. So, yours truly, Kevin Gustafson, is now a father. On February 25th, 2020, my wife Elka and I welcomed our son Alexander into the world. It's been an interesting time so far. I love the little guy, and I hope that he'll be proud of the work that his dad is doing to help raise awareness about important issues and different things that are important to me, and I think that will be important to him. But I will just say that becoming a father has really only further instilled in me a sense of urgency to deal with the myriad problems that we face in society and as a species. So with that quick aside, let's get into the latest episode, which is on Super Tuesday. So this week I want to talk about Super Tuesday. For those of you who may not be aware, Super Tuesday is when many states hold primaries and caucuses in the Democratic or Republican primaries that choose presidential nominations. There's basically no Republican primary this time. It's going to be Donald Trump who runs in the Republican ticket, so it's all on the Democrats. And obviously, if you've been paying attention at all, the field of Democrat candidates for president in 2020 was giant. It's like 20 freaking people, and it's narrowed down and narrowed down and narrowed down. We did get, till recently, basically it narrowed down to about 4 or 5 people. So you had this sort of centrist wing, which would be Biden, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and the sort of progressive wing, which was led by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And then you had the billionaires, Tim Steyer and Michael Bloomberg. So we've seen them in a few debates, and it was pretty clear relatively soon thereon that it was basically Bernie versus everybody. Him and Elizabeth Warren did propose a lot of the same things: Medicare for all, new taxes on the rich. Whereas from Joe Biden and essentially from Pete and Amy, you had basically an Obama style, we're not going to rock the boat, don't worry. Joe Biden literally said in a campaign fundraiser that nothing will fundamentally change. So you kind of can see from what perspective they are coming. And so basically what happened is you have the first caucus, which is in Iowa, which was basically a clusterfuck, and it wasn't quite sure, there was a problem with the app, the reporting app, and so the numbers didn't come in at the time frame that they needed to. They didn't come in until days later, which was already near the New Hampshire primary. But ultimately, Bernie Sanders did get more votes. Him and Pete Buttigieg split delegates, which is a weird thing. If you don't get the most votes, you should probably get the most delegates, but whatever. So they kind of split the Iowa caucus, and then New Hampshire came, and Bernie Sanders sort of handily won New Hampshire. And so then you move down to Nevada, in which it's another caucus, and Bernie Sanders wins the Nevada caucus. And so the next big contest was South Carolina. Now, Joe Biden's campaign up until South Carolina was basically on life support, and he needed a big win in South Carolina to essentially stay in the race. And what happened was basically he got that big win. and he did really well in South Carolina. He got the endorsement of Senator Clyburn, who holds a lot of sway in South Carolina. So you have Bernie Sanders coming in second in South Carolina, but basically a distant second. And that basically changes everything. I think what happened then was you had President Obama get on the phone with particularly Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar and tell them, look, you need to get out. You need to clear the way for Joe Biden. Joe Biden is going to be the nominee. And if there's any way that we can prevent Bernie Sanders from getting the nomination, then we need to do that. And basically, Pete said, okay, he gets out, endorses Biden. Amy says, okay, gets out and endorses Biden. Beto O'Rourke, who ran for president very unsuccessfully, sort of comes out of hiding and endorses Biden. So you had a lot of people basically drop out. And Warren does not drop out, says that she's going to take it all the way, and Bloomberg doesn't drop out, so he's going to go through Super Tuesday, which was his strategy all along. He drops $500 million in ads that everybody's seen and has annoyed the piss out of everybody, and is going to see how he does on Super Tuesday to see if he can win. So, Super Tuesday, you've got a number of different states voting: California, Texas, North Carolina, Virginia, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Colorado, Tennessee, Alabama, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Utah, Maine, and Vermont. So, how did it go? Well, if obviously you're paying attention at all to politics, which you probably are if you're listening to this podcast, Biden did very well. All of the consolidation that was hoped for by Amy and Pete dropping out, I think definitely did happen. And so Joe Biden wins a majority of the states on Super Tuesday and a majority of the associated delegates. That's not obviously the whole story, so let's kind of look into the major sort of important things. Look in California, which had 415 delegates. The biggest prize of the night goes to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, well over 1 million votes for Bernie Sanders, almost a 10-point lead. It's still, as I'm recording this, only 92% in, but hand lead by Senator Sanders in California. Some of the other states that weren't even really close was North Carolina. Biden destroyed in North Carolina, 43% to Bernie Sanders, 24%. He also destroyed in Virginia, 53% to Sanders, 23%. He was, 7 points ahead or so in Massachusetts, almost 10 points ahead in Minnesota, over 10 points. So Bernie Sanders gets Colorado, again, winning by 10 points. So you could see basically the South and places that are traditionally Democratic strongholds normally went, California and Colorado are Democratic strongholds, and they went for Sanders. But more traditional voters definitely chose Biden. So you see in Tennessee, goes to Biden by quite a bit. Alabama, Biden by quite a bit. Oklahoma, not as much. Arkansas, quite a bit. Sanders took Utah by a huge margin. The other ones didn't even come close. And very close in Maine. And of course, Bernie Sanders took his home state of Vermont. And so ultimately, basically, the delegate count stands as of right now at 566 for Biden and 501 for Bernie Sanders. And Elizabeth Warren has 61. So Biden is 65 points or 65 delegates ahead. You do need 1,991, I think is the number, to actually clinch the nomination. And so the question would be, is there going to be a clinched nomination? Probably not. It doesn't really, I don't see how that, this is what has to happen. Basically, there's still some big states to come. Pennsylvania, New York, Missouri even has quite a few delegates. And so on Tuesday, the Tuesday after Super Tuesday, you'll have big states like Michigan that are important for the general election. That will be very important for, if Bernie is going to take it, Bernie will have to basically win all of those. And so if you look at some of the voter trends that are coming out, basically it's an old-young divide. That old people are pretty much in the Biden camp, young people are pretty much in the Bernie camp, and so who comes out to vote is going to sway who wins these elections. And the truth of the matter is that young people who overwhelmingly support Bernie Sanders did not show up to the polls. And I can understand why. Some of them were hours long. It obviously favors people who are 65 and older who are retired and go to the polls whenever they want. I know the last person to come out of North Carolina didn't come out until the morning after, didn't vote till like 1 in the morning or something like that. And so there are a lot of reasons why you can see young people not showing up or not showing up in as big a numbers as older people, partially because it's just damn hard to vote. And I think that's a strategy. That's a strategy for the status quo, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, to essentially maintain their stranglehold on power because through voter repression and long lines and not a lot of polling places and lots of problems at polling places, which they've been reported all over, especially even in California, where Bernie did win. There were a lot of difficulties and problems and issues. And so there's a reason why the young people didn't show up other than they're just lazy and only on their computer, which is what you will hear from a lot of people, particularly Warren people, which is very interesting. Because that's the other thing in the night, that basically Elizabeth Warren not getting out took a lot of votes away from Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders would have dominated in Maine, would have dominated in Vermont like he did, would have dominated in Utah, even though he already did pretty well. It would have been, I don't think he would have taken Arkansas, would have given Biden a run for his money in Oklahoma, definitely would have, I think made a difference in Minnesota. It definitely would have made a difference. They definitely split the vote in Minnesota. It would have made a huge difference in Massachusetts. And so other than the South, Elizabeth Warren basically, her whole role at this point is to take votes away from Bernie Sanders. And I'm not really sure why she's doing this. I'm not sure what her game plan actually is. There has been talk that she's reevaluating her campaign after Super Tuesday, but she shows no signs right now of getting out and giving her delegates to Bernie, which would close the gap significantly and go a long way to consolidating the more progressive wing of the party and consolidate the election down to a two-person race, basically Biden versus Sanders, because Bloomberg, after his dismal showing on Super Tuesday, I think he gained one, he won one primary in American Samoa and got like 23 delegates or something like that. Did not do very well, but did better than Warren in places like Tennessee and Colorado and Alabama. So, I think that says quite a lot, but I'm not really sure what Elizabeth Warren's position is right now. She's got a lot of heat from a lot of Bernie people who are known to be passionate, and to the point that Bernie has even had to say, "Whoa, people, like it's a little ridiculous. You don't have to be so vitriolic. Like, chill out." But people are passionate, and they want to know what the hell she's doing, and it doesn't seem clear, because when we look at the potential of a Joe Biden candidacy, we are looking at the potential of another Trump administration. Look, Joe Biden is old. He's seemingly insane. Or senile or something. I mean, he just the other day, he couldn't remember the Declaration of Independence. Trump tweeted the day after Super Tuesday a gaffe reel that's minutes long of Biden saying all sorts of crazy things, and it's long and it's devastating. And so Biden, already after Super Tuesday, you saw this flood of things that show the fight against Social Security, the work on segregation, all of these kinds of things. And the best defense that we'll have is that we'll be returning to the good old days of the Obama era, where kids were still put in cages and you had massive deportations and drone strikes and continuous warfare and all the kind of things that we're trying to fight against. And again, remember, Joe Biden said to his rich people, nothing will fundamentally change. And that is enough to me to fight against a Joe Biden candidacy in any way at all possible. Even the most ardent socialist can see a difference between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Now, you can make the claim that Bernie Sanders is just a social democrat, he's not a socialist, and that would be fair. But in terms of the difference between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, in terms of what would be done or attempted to be done for the working class, I don't think there's much daylight between them. But ultimately, I think the strategy here that Obama and other people tried to do before Super Tuesday was to make it so that that Bernie Sanders would just be unable to clinch the nomination. That they want to go into a brokered Democratic National Convention. And this reminds me very much of in 1944 when you had Henry Wallace vying to be the vice president, which he had been under Franklin Roosevelt, and the party elites and the sort of rich people being a bit afraid of Henry Wallace and his policies and deciding essentially at the convention to replace Henry Wallace with Harry Truman. And then we get the bombs dropped and the anti-communist campaigns and all sorts of things that come out of Harry Truman. So the party elites in the Democratic Party messing up with the sort of votes or messing with things to make sure that it pleases them is not some kind of crazy idea. It's definitely happened before. And in this case, the reason why they want to get to a brokered convention is because if you can't clinch the nominations, then on the second round, you have superdelegates voting. So if anyone remembers in 2016, superdelegates were on the first round of the voting. So that heavily swayed things in Hillary Clinton's favor when they were doing tallies and things like that. Now, Bernie still did really well, but they counted these superdelegates, these people that don't have to go by what the election in their state said. They're high-ranking members of the Democratic Party, and they can vote however they want. The compromise coming out of 2016 where Bernie was saying, look, I just want to get rid of these superdelegates. I think they're undemocratic, they're crappy. Let's just get rid of them. That the compromise that came out of them was basically, okay, the rules will be that there won't be superdelegates on the first ballot. So if somebody runs away with it, they're not going to bring in the superdelegates. But if nobody has enough of the votes, then the superdelegates get to come in. And I think that is fundamentally undemocratic and unfair. And on a debate stage, all of the candidates except for Bernie Sanders said that even if they didn't, if the person with the most votes coming into the convention doesn't necessarily mean that they should get it. So they're saying that despite the will of the voters, the party should ultimately decide. It is fundamentally anti-democratic, and it basically just helps Joe Biden because if Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden come to the convention with the same number of delegates, we kind of know how the superdelegates are going to go because they're terrified of Bernie. These are people who are rich and want the status quo and don't want anything to fundamentally change. They're very much in the Biden camp, and they're going to vote for Joe Biden. So the thing that we need to avoid at all costs is a brokered convention. So there's two ways this goes. Look, either Bernie reconsolidates the campaign, or maybe Elizabeth Warren drops out and puts her support his way, maybe changes his tactics a little bit, goes negative against Biden, has some good debate performances against Biden, and we see a turn towards Bernie. Bernie gets enough of the delegates, can sway some superdelegates, and gets the nomination for the party. If he gets the nomination for the party, I believe he wins the presidency, and we have a Bernie Sanders presidency, and we get to establish a utopia in America. But if that utopian vision doesn't happen, which it very well might, we do have another alternative, and this is something that I want to kind of propose, and I think it would be an interesting idea to have a conversation with somebody about. But just basically, look, I can see a situation where Bernie loses this, where Bernie doesn't come into the convention with the most delegates, which would make his argument that he should be the nominee go against him. Bernie loses, then Biden becomes the nominee. Biden will then lose to Trump, I'm almost sure, because, Hillary Clinton lost to Trump. Biden is basically the same candidate, so he'll probably lose to Trump, but Bernie will probably support Biden because that's what he said he's done, and he's a legitimate dude. And but then Bernie will have the chance to legitimately talk about starting a third party. There's been hints of that along with this campaign. The frustration of going against the Democratic Party makes it so that get out of the shadow of the Democratic Party and have our own party like they do in England or in the UK. I think that would be the way that we should go about doing this in the event that Bernie doesn't get the nomination again, that he gets it stolen from him again. So look, the big thing is there's light at the end of this tunnel. There is a way of looking at this which isn't just all doom and gloom. I was really frustrated by what happened on Super Tuesday. I thought that Bernie was going to run away with it, and he didn't, because the Democratic Party does not want him to run away with it. So it's going to be a long, drag-out battle, and we'll definitely see how this all goes out. But I did want to make an episode just so to kind of talk about this kind of stuff and to see, for those people who listen to this podcast who are interested in the debate, kind of how I was looking at it and how a few different ways that we can look at this and go forward. So look, worst case scenario, Bernie doesn't get it and we get a third party. Best case scenario, Bernie gets it and we get President Bernie Sanders. Either of those two things I can live with, and I think are going to be good things for the party either way. So let's see how this goes, and hopefully it goes well. All right, with that's all for me this week. There's going to be some staggered episodes and things coming up. I'm going to get to things when I absolutely can, but like I said at the beginning of the episode, got a new kid. So we'll see you guys at the next episode. All right, bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sensible Socialist Podcast. This podcast is supported by listeners like you, and no advertisements or anything will ever be said. If you want to support the podcast, please go to patreon.com/sensiblesocialist and give today. Also, please give us a review or a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast, as it greatly helps. All right, see you next time.